The rollerblader's world is limitless. In life, there's things you can't.
You know what people say about how the world died? They say it was a tragedy. Really, it was inevitable. And here we are, after the age of worms has begun, still alive, yet not living.
Hello. Can you hear me? Is that working now?
You know what people say
Hello?
about how the
brilliant.
world died?
Okay, I was literally just saying, this is my first time doing anything like this, so please bear with me whilst I work out how this goes. But hello, salutations, welcome. I can see we have 6 people already, and welcome to this. This is the inaugural stream for what will be me doing a world building, asking you guys for ideas with world building, and generally talking about the Power Word World series and where it's headed and ideas for it, and just, cross-pollinating. I was thinking, if I'm going to be doing this world building in my own time anyway, and I tend to mumble to myself generally because I'm insane, I might as well do it to people, and then I seem marginally less insane. Also, hello, yes, Faylire. Sure, I'd love to see some homebrew content that you've created. Perhaps that would be good inspiration, and we can talk about on the stream. But anyway, to start with this, I thought I'd give a rundown of Blood Hunter. Cool. I thought I'd give a rundown of everything that's planned so far. So essentially, it's been a pretty long hiatus as basically COVID got to our editing schedule, and it's been a bit erratic. But we're working towards a new series with a new cast member, which is very exciting. And I know that's a bit of a leak. I don't know how much Naomi's going to chastise me for stuff I leak here, in a sense, because obviously some of it is going to be a bit in the open. But this is more for people that are interested in sort of how my planning works, the behind the scenes, and the general idea of things. But this new series, I've got permission from Naomi in the chat saying it's okay for me to spoil stuff. I will try to not spoil anything that's like main story plot relevant. And the idea with this is to focus on the periphery stuff in the world, to flesh it out so it's nice and juicy by the time we actually get to it on the podcast itself. But yeah, so this world, I'm presently in a hallway because this is the room next to the Wi-Fi router, but this hallway is in a building which is in the Black Forest. The Black Forest is a place near and dear to my family and my home. Also, let's get a bit of background music. I set up all this nice background music, so I think getting it going would be good. And I'm going to put it on shuffle. There we go. Okay. Is that working for people? Can you hear it? Well, let me know if you can hear it. If you can't, I can fiddle about with it a bit. But yeah, no. Essentially, the Black Forest is this area like rich with folklore and with folk stories and all of these tales. Grimm's fairy tales are sort of from around this region. Hansel and Gretel is based on a tale from a town about a few miles that way. So, yeah, a bit like Dark Forest. This is essentially where all of those myths of the dark, spooky forest come from. So it's this sort of beautiful, rich place that's got this, is ripe with inspiration. And during lockdown, I sort of ran this as an online campaign and for a few friends. Briefly, and I went to town on it because I just graduated and I had very little to do, so I just spent all my time just sort of planning this world, and I want to develop it even more. So the world itself is called Swavia, and actually what kicked off the inspiration, as you can see on screen right here, this is the art of Arthur Rackman. Now, Arthur Rackman, thankfully, all his art is in the public domain because he was around in sort of the 1920s. You might know him from the one with the man with his daughter and the pitchfork. I think that was him. I might be wrong. But either way, this is some of his art. Brilliant American artist who illustrated Grimm's fairy tales and a selection of Irish fairy tales, among other things. And you see the biggest picture on here. There's an old man reading scary stories to children, and that sort of lit up my imagination, because with Dungeons and Dragons, all too often we are in a situation where people want to shy away from Germanic fairy stories. You know, people want to like make it edgy and different, Either it ends up being Lord of the Rings, or people are sort of embarrassed of the fairy tale origins of the genre. And so what I was attempting to do with this world is reclaim that a bit, especially as this is very personal, this kind of cultural setting. And it's so ripe with potential. And I think leaning into that fairy tale vibe, that sort of dark, spooky, creepy fairy tale where it all ends up quite gory, like in the original Grimm's fairy tales, is something that could eminently lead to a lot of really interesting plot lines and ways for stories to be told. And so attempting that with this world, inspired by this art, which we are allowed to use, which is cool, I have been trying to build this up and turn it into something interesting and compelling. Okay, so that's the preliminary stuff. That's the sort of basics of it out of the way. So sorry, let me just read the chat so I can catch up a bit. That was a bit of a ramble, but you can use. I'll have a read of it in a bit. I'll just open it in here. I need to request access, I'm afraid, but I have requested access to the Blood Hunter subclass linked in the chat. Phalar. So if you want to give me access to it, I'd love to have a read. Sound effects artists tend to use the sound of sizzling bacon to replicate sound effects. That's really interesting. I've never done that. So you want to see the map? Okay, well, we're going to get to this. How do I edit map? It's going to take a second to initialize. So let me change scene here. As I say, this is all going to be a learning process. If I do that, can you see? Does that work? Ah, right. I'll have a read of that in a sec once I've shown you guys the map here. Oh dear, that's the wrong thing. Let me frame that. Can you guys see the incarnate screen, which is just loading at present? Yeah, it should be loading. It's just a bit slow sometimes. It do be like this. And now it's saying it's slowing down Firefox. Great. So I'm going to sort of leave that going for a second, and I'll actually show you... I'm not going to be able to show you without the bookmarks tab because the little screen thing doesn't fit a 16:9 ratio. Incarnate is a really good map building tool. It works really well, but it isn't actually where I built the map originally. And so we're not just staring at this. I will show you. Oh, come on. This was working before. Let me take a second. Hexographer. You can see it here. This is another one that is bloody great. Okay. Oh, no. No, I've just opened a portal to hell. Great. Christ. Don't want display capture. I want window capture. Sorry about this, guys. Create new, window capture 3. And I want it to... There we go. Okay, let me bring this back. You can see this is all very professional, and will only get more professional with time. But yeah, okay. So Hexographer? Hexographer is an absolutely amazing tool. It's basically... Oh, I shouldn't have done that. Hexographer allows you to build hex maps and make notes about them and really just sort of get an understanding of your world map on a more granular level. It sort of allows you to build it bit by bit, and then what I normally do is I'll make a map here, and then I'll either draw it on paper or I will bring it into Incarnate, which just does not seem to be working, frustratingly enough. So I'm going to close that and try again. But you can see here, I believe, the map. I can't really get all of it in frame, unfortunately, but I can get as much of it as possible. So there we go. So Hexographer was essentially how I started here. I had this idea that I didn't want anything more than just a kingdom. And so I find like a lot of my campaigns, I'll plan a whole world, I'll have these amazing bits and bobs all over the place, but none of it I can really actually use for various reasons, predominantly because it's so big and it takes so long to get places that not a lot ends up happening. And that's a real problem with how I work and how excited I get about things. But essentially, I'm just trying to break away from that a bit. And I've been doing a good job recently. This world was a really good step in the right direction. So you see there's all these different places inside. These are duchies within Swavia. Another thing that I wanted from the get-go with this world is less like, because we're a podcast and we want it to remain engaging throughout, a lot of the stuff that you would assume in a fantasy world that is in a normal D&D game tends to end up just being not very compelling. We've all listened to a D&D podcast where you've just kind of had like 2 episodes of shopping, and those 2 episodes are dull as hell. And especially for our podcast, which is edited down to make it seem like a radio play, so it's all about 30 minutes. You get whole episodes that are just kind of dead, and it's stuff we, for the most part, just kind of cut out. And so I'm basically trying to slim that down. And by my solution to that is to make it a post-apocalyptic world. By making it a post-apocalyptic world, I put it in a position where you don't have towns to go to, or at least those towns will be more like dungeons than like a shopping episode. And I feel that makes a more compelling thing for a listener, and also it keeps the players on their toes. With this setting, I want to create a sense of unease. This is Grimm's fairy tales, though the idea of a field full of goblins may seem passé and not engaging to our modern ears. You say that to like some medieval peasant woman. You see, there's goblins over there and they'll eat your children. That's terrifying. And by taking away any vestiges of authority from that situation, it creates something quite dark and hard. And and supplies being limited, as Malakara said in the chat. Having supplies be limited is like really good because it means players have to think more creatively. If you can just go back to the town to get whatever you need to go deal with the problem, it takes away a lot of what could be an interesting more survivally experience. And I think it gives doing this kind of campaign gives more way to more how do I say it, like more character moments essentially. I'm just going to download the map. Unfortunately, bugger, I've buggered it again. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to get Incarnate working, but that's all right. We weren't really going to use it for the actual stream anyway. We weren't going to be going around editing Incarnate because that's really the last step of things. So I'm going to create new image, upload an image, and I'm going to upload the map so you can see the finished product map as it stands. Oh, that's way too big. Okay, let's move this down. Okay. So yeah, and I'll bring this back a bit. There we go. So the Kingdom of Swavia. Now, originally it was SWE, Via, until people started making the connections that this was meant to be like Sweden, rather than what it actually was, which was Swavia, which has been spelt both ways in the past, and I was trying to go for the more historic spelling of Swabia. But yeah, Swabia it was a medieval kingdom in Baden-Württemberg, which is where the Black Forest is. And then you've got Bavaria in there as well, which is another sort of place where I'm taking a lot of influences from that I personally spent quite a lot of time as a child. So also, bloody hell, my hair. Like, I just can't control it. I've got a proper case of lockdown hair. It's just deciding to go right in front of my face. So I apologise if I'm just pushing it aside every 2 seconds. But yeah, so the Kingdom of Swavia. And I suppose I can play around with this map and we can zoom in. But let's put it behind my face. If I can bleeding get the thing going. There we go. So we can now zoom in. And it's a very high resolution map, so we shouldn't struggle too much with this. But we can see this is the duchy where the players are going to start. We've got this collapsed world, this sort of situation where all of the sort of kingdom has fallen apart, and essentially I haven't explained the core premise, the core plot. So you can see here, and I'll take this as an opportunity to. If I move in on Tolstenia, this was the first duchy. This is where the kingdom was founded. It is the centre of the kingdom of Swavia before its collapse. Now, the king was this, beloved monarch living in a peacetime, fields full of wine and song, all of that sort of like very traditional jovial king stuff, to keep with that fairy tale theme. But unfortunately, a great ice age came, a great winter, and with it the stench of undeath. And now that is a myth that is repeated over and over in so much Germanic folklore. This idea of a great winter, this idea of winter coming and bringing death with it, and that correlation, which I think is so like key and interesting that I thought it was central to the idea of sort of keeping people within this kingdom, firstly, but also to sort of give a sense that there's some larger story at play. But the king, in order to save the people of his kingdom and in order to save his kingdom from this encroaching winter, made a deal with a coven of 3 hags, 3 dark, evil crones, very Macbeth. And the deal was basically, you save my kingdom, you keep it autumn forever, and in return he will he promised to give his life, so he'd die, his kingdom, so the hags are now the 3 hag queens of Swavia, and his firstborn, who has been missing ever since. And so these crones took over the kingdom and immediately built up an army of bad fairies, evil fairies. And I'm going with a very traditional sort of Celtic inspiration for that. So goblins and trolls are kind of fairies. I just kind of like that vibe, I suppose. Naomi, actually, quick question for you. Do you think I should play the little intro bit I did on stream to give people an idea of what we're going with? I'd like to get your opinion on it, or whether we should save it. Either way. No? Okay. You'll have to wait for that. I've already started editing up the intro. I know I should talk about it, but I think that intro bit does a better job explaining the story than I could in a briefer time. But anyway, essentially, you've got Swavia, the kingdom, in a state of disarray, slowly collapsing, and the hags don't like people gathering in large communities. They like suffering. They like watching the populace struggle to survive. It's their twisted sort of way of seeing the world. It's how they sort of see how life should be, almost. A more natural order, a more feral order. And so they literally ruined every city. So every city is a massive mega dungeon. And every sort of like town is sort of like the people scattered. And villages are really the only bastions of civilization, which is great because it means I can come up with a pretty full cast for each settlement. But I also mean, having all of the main cities become dungeons, I think should make some really fun places. And basically each place, each town has kind of a dark end, its own like tragedy that is unique to that location. And that's one of the things I'd like some help with you guys with, to sort of talk through some of my ideas for that, and also some of the ones I've already got, and also help come up with some for areas that are a bit less developed. So that's something that I think will be fun in these. But yeah, so essentially Tolstenia is where the castle is, and this is sort of the final area. Been to Swavia, I think it's just north of Manchester. Famous Germanic town. The populace gathers, they are harder to rule over. Yeah, exactly. So the hags are basically just they want to maintain their power. These are, these strange, dark, evil crones. And so I think people will always see witches and hags as a low-level D&D villains. They're never like the bad guys. Which I think is such a shame, because having just like your classic evil coven of witches, is so good, and you can give each of those witches a personality. So actually, I'll cut to a different window now. So I'll close this image, and we will, I believe, if I do that, yeah, you can see the Kingdom of Swavia, but I'm going to take you to the player's guide. So I started working on this. This is to help people, but you can see here are the Hag Queens of Swavia. You've got Auntie Donna Bloom, Mother Veilchen, and Granny Shearling. You can sort of read a bit about them there. If you so desire. I can scroll down a bit if people want to have a sort of view of this. But yeah, so I love goblins as well. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat and people are going on about goblins. And I expressly wanted the Hag's army to be like goblins, hobgoblins, bugbears, trolls, all of like these very quintessential like monsters that sort of are the weird little green things and the like. And I think by flavouring them as basically being the unseelie fae, because the unseelie fae, there aren't many of them, unless you just want darklings running around all the time. I'd love to see a boglin. I mean, boglins are essentially just rubbery goblins. So, I think they're a subcategory, I would say. But I think having the Hag Queens have this army also makes them more intimidating. It gives them like sort of backup in a sense. And Auntie Donna Bloom is the goblin dogs. You mean wargs, I assume. There will be wargs, yes. All of these things. But they're all under the thumb of Auntie Donna Bloom. Auntie Donna Bloom is sort of the general in a sense. Goblin dogs? Are they actually a different thing? I don't know. Do they have a stat block? I don't think I've come across them before. I'm not sure I know. I'm trying to go through my brain and remember if I know of a thing called goblin dogs, but I don't think I do. But anyway, so we've got the three hags ruling over the place. Yada, yada, yada. You've got low level, mid level, high level. In a sort of meta-gamey sense, they go in sort of age order. So you've got Auntie Donna Bloom and the lower rungs, this sort of giant, hulking, quite stupid hag. Then you've got Mother Veilchen, like this conniving, sly one. And then you got Granny Shearling, just this terrifying old woman in a rocking chair, covered in rags. I think that's all the information I'm going to give about Granny Shearling, because she's meant to be mysterious, and I would like people to listen to the podcast if they want to find out more. But yeah, so you can sort of see a bit about them there. And then I've also been working on this guide to Swavia. I've got the different sort of inhabitants of the world. Awakened animals I wanted, because I wanted that kind of Narnia-esque, fairy tale vibe, where there's these sort of animals that can talk, that are just scattered around the place, but with bright green eyes, just so people aren't just talking to every single animal they meet, thinking it might talk. There's the giants. You've got to have some giants. Satyrs. They're from the Feywild. Trolls from the Feywild. Goblins. Furbolgs I wanted in there, but they're kind of mysterious and people don't really know if they exist. Some of this might be double bluff, by the way. I've deliberately written this so not all of this will be included, and some of the stories are real and some of the stories are fake. Because in real life, in these sort of folk story environments, nobody really knows what's real and fake. And I think that's one of the most compelling things about folklore for me, is the mystery of it, in a sense. Because folklore, is indiscriminate. When it comes to folklore, a good example I like to tell is, so lions and unicorns and dragons were all put aside each other in ideas of bestiaries. So they'd have these medieval manuscripts that would be bestiaries talking about all of the monsters of the world. And of course, lions, absolutely real. Unicorns were probably a misrepresentation of rhinos that somebody had seen on a campaign to Africa or something. And then dragons were just completely fictitious. So you've got this situation where people don't really know what's real and what isn't. So I want to add lots of folk tales in there that could be real, could be a perversion of the truth, or could be completely nonsense. And no, Naomi, I don't expect you to remember anything in this guide. To be fair, I don't expect any of you to. I think this is mostly for me. And also, I do hope if people like the world, by the time it's done, I could do something like a DM's Guild release or something. Right. I've never played Pathfinder, apart from Pathfinder 3.5 years ago. Back when everybody was like, "Oh, fucking 4th edition! All my homies hate 4th edition." I'm afraid Goblin dogs aren't something I'm too familiar with. But yeah, I've got other things. We've got merfolk, changelings, centaurs, kobolds. And so there's a nice variety in there. For gods, I deliberately went with the Anglo-Saxon gods, who are, I think, this nice blend of a sort of softer medieval but still distinctly Germanic sort of tradition. And it means it's a shortcut to a lot of stuff. I could come up with totally unique deities, or I could just use the ones from Forgotten Realms, but both of those didn't really appeal to me. They didn't seem too grounded. The problem I have with coming up with unique sets of gods is then you've got to come up with the unique rituals and all of this, and there's a lot to draw from in real world. Names are hard, yeah. Names are really hard for things like gods. And I always find you go far too fantasy with it, whereas medieval gods, if you actually look at how people did medieval gods and how people can conceptualize them, it was a lot less rigid and defined, this is the god of blank and they look like this and that. There's always these weird little traditions Thunol wants a sprig of mistletoe planted here each day just because, weird little things like that. And that, so I for my dissertation, studied a lot of paganism and neo-paganism at university. And so I'm actually, more well-versed than your average person in terms of how, like, pagan belief works. And the D&D style of pagan belief is a non-pagan's perception of, D&D. Sorry, I'm seeing we've got a raid apparently. Hello, Pepag8. Hello. Thank you, Stumpy Hands. We're being raided. Blimey. I'll just continue, and then if people want to interject and say hi, feel free to. Hello everybody that's just joined. As Naomi says in the chat, we are a D&D podcast, and we're building up to a new series, and I've been planning this world based on Grimm's fairy tale stuff and Germanic folklore, and I'm now, to be fair, mention the Saxons and the raids happening is quite funny. Almost instantaneously. That was as if on cue. Maybe I should just start talking about Vikings and maybe the mere mention. Maybe that'll... But yeah, no. Basically, I'm this Germanic-inspired world. I'll go back to the map so that people can have a look. I need to zoom out again. The Kingdom of Swavia, which is it's been near and dear to me. I've been working on this for about a year now. Really trying my best to make something compelling and interesting. And essentially, it's a post-apocalyptic world that leans into the ideas of Germanic myth, because so much of Dungeons & Dragons is always embarrassed of the association with fairy tales, whereas this is just being like, Brothers Grimm's fairy tales, straight up, that's the inspiration. I'm presently in the Black Forest, and I'm gonna, once I'm out of lockdown and I'm allowed to leave, I'm gonna go and explore some of the most haunted locations around the place, and places of folklore, which I'm very excited for. And I might post about some of those on the Twitter if people are interested. But yeah, so this is in progress, and so I would love your help with this. But anyway, so I was talking about the gods. Essentially, the gods of Swavia are the Anglo-Saxon gods. To make it simple, they're easy to use, and when I say like Thanor, instantly sort of people understand, or Woden, people instantly sort of get it. It means that there's less time in a podcast that I need to spend on exposition, which is something I'm constantly accused of, waffling on about my world building. And it's far simpler if I'm just like, Woden, the god of wisdom, and people are like, it's Odin, I know that one. Except it's going to be sort of more toward the Anglo-Saxon side, because I say it's a bit softer and a bit less cliche and a bit less like overused. But still, I think it's really compelling. I love this mythology. I think it's really interesting. And the thing that gets me is all of these little rituals and bits and bobs that they used to do that I really like. I'd actually be interested in people's opinions on this, because I'm still a bit umming and ahhing about the gods. This is one of the more recent things I've done, because we're going to have a cleric on the podcast, spoilers, as one of the characters. So what do people think about the idea of using real-world gods, even sort of dead ones and sort of ones that people don't really believe in anymore, instead of just like using the default Forgotten Realms ones or coming up with your own? What do you think on that? Fine if you want to criticize it, but I thought this would be simpler, essentially. But I'd love to hear some stuff in the chat. Stumpy Hands. No, thank you very much for the raid. And I'm sorry, I think I must have missed him. Sorry, I was just rambling on there. But it was very kind of him to bring so many people, and I do hope you all find it vaguely compelling. But yeah, so essentially the gods are something that I'm a bit iffy on, and if anybody's got any ideas, I'd really like to hear them, especially for Ingvi. Currently I have Ingvi as the god of death. Ingvi is one of those Anglo-Saxon gods that isn't really a thing that is a god of death. Technically Woden's the god of death, but I kind of didn't want those cross-pollinating too much, and there isn't necessarily a Germanic god of death. Most of them are tied to fertility, but that's really a conception that we've kind of lost, like associating fertility and death together, which I think is very interesting, and it could potentially be good to play around with it. But I don't know, I'm a bit umming and ahhing about it. So long as you and your players don't care, I don't see a problem with it. Yeah, I suppose at the end of the day, I think when doing a podcast though, it's interesting because you also got to consider the audience, you know, and that's something I've been trying to be more aware of. For RP, the idea of a cleric believing in a long-forgotten god would be an amazing opportunity to have somebody who worldviews as heretic. Yeah, no, exactly. I've been chatting with Henry, the player who's going to be playing the cleric, and it's been interesting talking about he's playing a character that's lost the faith. Everybody's kind of lost the faith because the apocalypse happened, and their conception is that the gods are gone, because of course that is Germanic faith, Thrive in the Rock, the great end, and then the gods piss off and the world is left to do as they will. So I think it's going to be interesting talking about like faith, apocalypse, like shunned upon gods, all of this kind of stuff and those kinds of themes. But yeah, I also have other things. So I've got the gods of the elves who I wanted to be geotheistic in a quite Wiccan kind of way. Was kind of how I was imagining it. There's a sort of twist on the normal perception of elves as being kind of like flighty and airy. I wanted a more again to keep with the Germanic vibe, a more black magic-y kind of elves. But not in a bad way, but just in a way of like they're isolated weirdos who live in the forest, you know what I mean? And the god of the dwarves, they're monotheistic. They're the monotheistic one, but they're not pushing it on people. Was really the goal. So yeah, I feel like I could ramble on, but what I came here for help with wasn't this. I think I want some help. Give some help with this. So if I zoom in on Kentrum, this is the place. Oh, too far. This is the place where the players are going to start. And essentially, this is your classic Black Forest area. The Nabelwald is a bit of a bastardization of a name. It's it's not perfect, but essentially it means the Misty Woods would probably be the closest translation. The world map before, thank you. I wanted to go for like quite a classic like drawn map vibe. I really appreciate that, Bambi. This is the first map, and then it's all going to be transferred over. But so we got Kentrum, and I'll show it on the other map because people prefer that essentially whilst we're talking about it because it's cool. So you can see Kentrum right at the top there. So if I zoom in, can everybody see that? There we go. Okay, Kentrum. So you've got the Nabelwald. The Nabelwald is this creepy, mysterious forest where you can see that there's that river that's going down the mountainside. Now, of course, I've tried, because one thing I always do with my maps that is absolutely dumb of me, and world-building subreddits have ripped me a long one for, is my maps will always have rivers that make no sense with the geography. Rivers will always flow downhill, so you've got to think about elevation when you're doing rivers. So essentially, this river is going down from this mountain all the way into this lake in the heart of the forest. And slight spoilers. You can see that there's a location right at the top of the mountain there. And that location is essentially a portal to the Feywild. And I have the idea that basically this water is mystical water that's flowing downstream, and then when it reaches the end, it becomes this mist that causes the area around it to become more touched by magic. And then obviously since the apocalypse, it's kind of become perverted and dark. And whereas once it was like this mystical place where fairies would dance near the stream, it's now like, it's full of evil ghosts that want to eat you. The mist makes it treacherous in a sort of like Curse of Strahd kind of way. I've got something from Malkar again. I believe in 5e they used Greek and Norse and other gods. They do as an optional thing, which is essentially what I'm doing. But I believe in 2nd edition they only had that, and then they kind of, with supplements, added other sort of original gods. But it was only because Greyhawk essentially had bleeding... what's his name? Gary Gygax, creator of Dungeons & Dragons. He added all his friends' characters in as god kings. So when they'd finish a campaign, their character would just become a god. So if you look up the origins of like half the gods on the Forgotten Realms wiki or on the Greyhawk wiki or whatever, most of the time they're just one of Gary Gygax's mates. It's interesting. But yeah, I suppose if there is precedent for it, which means that I shouldn't be... I always second guess myself with these kinds of things. But yeah, so with the Nabelwald, I've got this mysterious dark forest. I want people to get lost in it. I want ghosts to be roaming around in there. That's one key thing I want. But I was wondering if any of you had any other ideas for cool and interesting little things that I can kind of just chuck in there. Please add in the chat if you've got any ideas for like things that could happen in a dark, mysterious, evergreen forest filled with sort of this strange magical mist. And let your imaginations run wild if you want to participate. But essentially, the Nabelwald, ripe with potential there. Player's Handbook. If I wasn't in Germany, I'm going to take your word for it. Unfortunately, all of my D&D books are back in the UK. I did not have... I only got one carry-on bag. So I've been wearing the same pair of trousers for a week. But unfortunately, I'm just going to have to take your word for it. But yeah, no, okay. That is comforting, the use of gods, pre-existing gods as precedent. I'm surprised that they've kept that till 5th edition, to be honest. Oh, I'm having a lovely time. Well, no, I'm having an okay time in Germany. My default response is that I'm having a lovely time. It's not really a holiday yet or anything. I was here because I had to be here for family reasons. But I've been in lockdown for 2 weeks. I get out tomorrow and I'm going to do so much hiking and go and find interesting locations for inspiration for this. But, anyway, that's beyond the fact. I'm excited to do that, but it means I've just been here typing my computer working on this for forever. And planning D&D stuff, and Naomi can attest to this. I've been spamming her and the others with messages. But yeah, so Kentrum. We've got the Nabelwald, and please, if any of you have any ideas, do fire away for things that could be in the mists. But beyond that, we've got Kaifernlichtung Lumbermill, which is in the north. You can see that there's a little dot there. And I should probably say, the little lake at the centre is called the Grauertsee, which just means like the grey sea, like a little grey lake. So it's got these grey waters. So it's all very drab and dark and mysterious. I don't know why this is mysterious. Apparently, the more you do this with the fingers, the more mysterious you are. You walk into a room, walk into a party, do this, and everybody's like, well, look at him, he's a mysterious fella. It's what I do at parties. That's why they never invite me again. I'm too mysterious. Makes connecting with people really hard. Anyway, Kaifan Lifting Lumbermill. Jesus. Will-o-wisps. That's very Anglo-Saxon as well. There's a Celtic-y Anglo-Saxon. That is really cool, actually. I really like the idea of that. Will-o-wisps is great because certainly you can sort of dot them around, and that's a way of incorporating spirits and also the mystical, and light is a really interesting to play around with if it gets dark. So there could be like it could be a settlement, could be a campfire, or it could be death. That is genius. I actually really like that. I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna add that into some notes. Hang on, give me a second. Okay. Yeah. Will-o-wisps. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. That's fantastic. Kaifan Lichten Lumbermill. To get back to that point and actually mention the place, because otherwise I think some people will wring my neck. But Kaifan Lichten Lumbermill is essentially going to be a more dwarven lumber camp, and it's kind of that's more spoilery, so I'm not going to ruin it too much. But essentially, there's a dwarven settlement to the north where they get lumber, and they sell it to Dunkelwich, which is the village that the players are going to start in. And in that village, the main instigating quest line is that all of the villagers are being turned to stone, and nobody knows why. They're just slowly turning to stone, starting at one of their limbs and spreading throughout their body. So there's just these statues all around the place. So eventually the dwarves have stopped bringing lumber, but this town was known for its carpentry long ago, or was really the idea. But the emphasis here is on decline, and so I want this town to sort of all be boarded up with bits of furniture, as if these great fine bits of craftsmanship that they were once known for have now just been used as defense, where they would have once been sold. If you guys have any ideas for characters for the first village, I'm all ears as well. That's something I need at the moment, because I was reading over my notes and I think I've got some good ones that are directly plot relevant, but I'd like some interesting people that are just survivors in this village that are just around the place. Naomi, you mentioned Ilarona. I don't know what that is. I genuinely don't know what that is. So if you could elaborate, I'd really like to hear a bit more. But yeah, so Kentrum essentially does this. You've also got what was it? Kentrum's Pool. Kentrum literally means centre, but I'm imagining that it was a person's name. So it was the first Duke of Kentrum's name, and this is really one of the two most rural, bumfuck, middle of nowhere duchies. So the duchies in Swavia each have a unique feel and character. Kentrum's is quite sort of Swabian Black Forest kind of region, and is very rural. The other really rural one is over here. It's the Uralt, which not really Germanic, but is going to be the sort of Scottish moors and highlands, because that's one of the accents I can kind of do, and I think it'd be a shame not to have it. Also, there's a character who is from this region, and giving that some linguistic backing rather than just having them scattered about the place, I think will give a sense of place. That's one thing I'm hoping to achieve, is give players a sense of place based on the voices I'm doing, so having certain kinds of voices be more common in certain places. Spooky lullaby ghost. Ooh, it's a monster that comes out from a mother drowning her children to save them from being poor. Ooh, okay. I'm going to have to read up on that one, but that sounds very good. I already have water spirits, which are actually quite a common thing in folklore around here. There's this idea that spirits of lakes will try to drag people in, sort of kelpies, but not kelpies. And so I can very much tie that in. And I like the idea of the lullabies, sort of like just singing in the mists. And that's something that will probably get easily recorded with somebody who can sing half decently. And have that be original, have original tracks for that. I'm trying to think if I could, if my German's up to scratch, to write a half decent, like creepy lullaby that would be world specific. That's probably something I should do. I'd like that. That's a good idea. Sorry, getting the cogs turning. There's also Königswalden, Königswalden, which is basically the next place over. And then you've got, no, I'm not singing you a lullaby, you'd be so lucky. I'm not a great singer. Königswalden is basically the neighbouring one, and this is an area that I'd sort of imagining had been partitioned between the humans and the dwarves. So you can see there's Svergenheim, which is just to the northwest of it, and that is like the dwarven part of the kingdom that sort of there was an agreement that the dwarves get this bit. It's not exclusively dwarves, but for the most part they've got it. And one bit of world building I'm really happy with, that I hope we get to, and has a really cool story that I won't elaborate fully, so I can leave a bit of information on like the history of the place. But there's Samspru, which you can see is right at the north of Svergenheim, and this is the Great Bridge city. So it's literally a whole city that's just a massive like stonemason bridge. This beautiful, extravagant dwarven bridge between the Northern Dwarf Kingdom and Svergenheim. That's now the sort of like regional capital of Svergenheim, and it's like one of the last bastions. That's like one of the few remaining cities that is managing to hold off. To the north, they're fighting against waves of undead coming in from the winter, and to the south, they're just fighting against waves of like goblins and trolls. So they've just got like a war on two fronts, and this city is just like entirely encompassed on this bridge with massive long fishing rods feeding the populace, like fishing down in the waters below, and a few things being grown in the city. But yeah, that's one place I hope we get to explore. Again, they might not, so it's quite sandboxy, but it's a place I'm quite proud of the world building for. Ooh, we've got some scary umlauts. They float above you all the time. Very creepy. How do you pronounce them? Whoa! That is the spookiest thing, I suppose. Hey there, Stumpy Hands. Good to have you back. And yeah, no, they behave themselves pretty well. But yeah, no, the Bridge City, I think, was one of, you know, when you get those ideas for like world building or for these kinds of things, and you're like, oh my god, that's actually pretty cool. And I think it's so dwarven, you know. But if I go on too much about it, I might spoil the origins of the city, which is something I want to save. I'm not sure if banshees are connected to the mist in any way or not, but I believe in lore they are being spotted and fade away like mist. Ooh, like screeching banshees. All right then, keep your secret. Oh, I mean, I tell you what, I think it's not too spoilerific because Naomi is in here and will probably would know as a character about the story of this place. It's quite famous. Yeah, no, the Banshees idea I absolutely love. In the Nabelwald, in the deep, misty forests of Kentrum, in the region where they're starting, having like screaming banshees and will-o'-wisps are two. That's perfect. Those are really cool ideas. I like that we're keeping with the ethereal theme, as if it's the mist itself that all the monsters come from. Which, you know, that's pretty interesting. I feel I can play around with that a bit. Because obviously that's the magical bit flowing in from the Feywild. But yeah, very, very cool. So yeah, Samspru, the Bridge City. There was once a time when the two dwarven kingdoms either side of the fjord hated each other. They would wage war constantly, and eventually it was coming towards this idea that one was going to invade the other and it was all going to fall to ruin. And people were preparing for war. When the Duke's daughter of Svergenheim sat on the edge of the fjord one day looking out, not wanting war, a great engineer herself, she sort of looked and could see ahead and saw very little. Until another figure comes and sits the other side of the fjord. Another woman, a sort of young woman, very pretty, to sort of start sketching, start drawing. And she waves back. They try talking, but they can, sort of only just hear each other. Eventually, they sort of motion to each other to sort of see each other the next night. The Duke's daughter runs away, and later finds out that the girl sitting opposite is the princess of the Dwarven Kingdom to the north. These two Dwarven kingdoms that have been warring so much. She's so infatuated with her, she feels she needs to communicate. So she builds a way, which I still haven't actually ironed out the cracks on. Ironed out the cracks? That's not the correct phrase. I haven't ironed out the cracks about how what device she builds or something to communicate with the girl across the fjord. But essentially, she manages to, and they start sort of communicating each and every night, meeting up in secret. And eventually they fall in love. And from that, they then decide that they have to be with each other. And so they start, building up, getting the populace to sort of come on side in secret, working with them together to sort of build up this plan, using the art from the princess and the ingenuity from the Duke's daughter. They start to design the city of Samspru. And so almost overnight they get all the builders in the city, explain their story to them and how they're in love, and so many of them are persuaded, they're heartened by this. There's been so much animosity between these two peoples that they don't want to see. That is mostly based on kings and queens, their petty disputes of the nobility. And so the common working people come together for this story of love, and they start building the bridge. And, in days, they have managed to reach the middle. And just as the princess and the Duke's daughter are about to embrace, their fathers march up behind them, swords in hand, ready to begin the war. But then the daughters stop them, profess their love, and talk down these two noble figures. And they see that they can't get in the way of love. They cannot stop this. They should not stop this. And so they agree to settle their dispute. And ever since, Samspru has been a shared people between the dwarves of the mountains and the dwarves of the hills. And yeah, so that's essentially it. That was a bit... the way I've written it down is a bit more well-developed and a bit more umming and ahhing. But I hope people like that. I was very proud of that story. And I thought it was vaguely compelling. Thank you, Snappy Hands. But yeah, I think a lot of you go to a lot of places and there's always some core myth for a lot of towns around here. I'm thinking the Pied Piper of Hamelin or something. There will be is it legend? Is it true? You don't really know. It's probably a bit of both, but there's a story behind a place. And that was one of those places that I was going for that. Ooh, another good minion for the Crones is Quicklings. I think they are in 5th edition. I can't quite fully remember about them. But the great spies for the Crones or messengers. Ooh, I do love that. That's actually really cool. These sort of little evil fairies running around delivering messages is very good. I originally had an idea for Auntie Donna Bloom, this big hulking, disfigured crone, hacking up a blackbird, just and one pops out and then it flies off delivering a message. But I feel that could equally work with just like a tiny little like fairy just being like, and this fairy just is like, what's the order? Just runs off. So yeah, I think I'll see about Quicklings. I believe they're in Volo's Guide. I don't think they're in the Monster Manual, but yeah. We've got McAllister. I think it's compelling. I think the dwarves cut corners if they built the bridge in a few days. Well, I mean, yeah. But that's what I mean about it being like you're not sure if it's true or not. Like you're not sure what's folklore, what's real. And having it be... I'm also going to do that because my ears are getting a bit boiling hot. But having that be kind of like a bit unbelievable and a bit romanticized, I think adds to the idea that this is a story that has been passed down rather than it's just like, here's what happened. You know, it's not a history lesson, it's a folktale. I've done research on how the two intertwine, doing the anthropology of memory and of oral storytelling. And so that kind of intersection fascinates me. It's something I find really, really compelling. So, that's what I mean. Like, you know, you're like, no, it can't have been built in like a few days. That's nonsense. That's complete bollocks. And how would the kings not have realised that there was a giant bridge being built? And, you know, it's got so many holes that, you know, it becomes just a story. Is really the idea. But yeah, no, I know that was a joke, but I'm just saying, like, that's kind of the vibe, you know what I mean? And I want to do that with more of the cities. Some of them are a bit underdeveloped, and as I come on here and chat with you guys, I want to try and make this regular and basically come up with more stuff and develop more of these and come up with little tales of things. So, as I say, I'm always really interested in your opinions on things. Stumpy Hands, what did you say? Sorry, I'm a bit of a slow reader, a bit dyslexic, so you're going to have to bear with me. I was saying most places, especially medieval fantasy settings, have how we got here mythos. People need that. Yeah. And the actual kingdom itself, I've got sort of this idea of like settlement. Like we found this land and we made it ours. We tamed the wild. And slight spoilers. You know, the old native inhabitants, the fairies that lived here, weren't too happy about that. But you know, like it's all sort of tied into mythology because nobody believes in fairies anymore. Why would people, you know, like, oh, we conquered it from the fairies? Absolute nonsense. And then later, when the apocalypse happens and the gates to the Feywild are suddenly open, everybody's like, oh shit, the fairies were real. Oh no. So that's really the thing there. So they had this origin story that everybody thought was kind of like, Then it's like, oh my god, no, that was absolutely 100% factual and they hate us now. So the Seelie Fae who were chucked out of this place won't help the mortal world against the Unseelie Fae because bridges were burned. And not Sam Sprue, it's made of stone. Hard to burn that one. But yeah, no, thank you. I think having mythos is important. Does the bridge have two different designs from each end? I hadn't imagined it like that, but that could actually be pretty interesting. I'd like to hear what other people think about that. I mean, it could be that for one side, I could go for a sort of more Nordic-inspired thing for the more northern side, because basically the Northern Kingdom, I was going like, it's more Scandinavian-y dwarves, and then the ones inside the Kingdom of Swavia are more sort of like Germanic kind of Saxon dwarves in terms of mythos and inspiration and in terms of like stylings. So yeah, I don't know. That could actually be really good. I guess I'm not good at artist. I can't actually draw that well. So I'd love to do a design of it, but But yeah, no, it could be Nordic on one side and then it goes into more sort of general Germanic on the other. Could be that they're made out of like different stones, different carvings, and it intersects in the middle and there's all the buildings on top which are kind of just like gone either side. But anyway, like, yeah, no, that's actually a really interesting point. I will mull that one over because I'm undecided on it, but in theory it seems quite cool. And that would also lend itself to the story then. It would explain why people are explained the story. Like, why has it got two different, styles? Yeah, it's also like, would it be structurally sound? Is that important in this? I know. People can get too caught up in that kind of thing. Caesar's Rhine bridges were built in just a few days, and they weren't dwarves. Well, there we go. How do we know Caesar wasn't a dwarf? I've seen no historical accounts stating clearly that Caesar wasn't a dwarf. Checkmate, dwarf theists. I don't like that word for some reason. That's where he went wrong. Lack of dwarves. Absolutely. You need dwarves. They get the job done, every single time. But yeah, so we've got Zwigenheim. Altberg is essentially where humans sort of came from, in a sense. It's essentially where giants come from as well. It's a less rural region because lots of people would go on holiday there. It's quite pretty. Not as much as in Tosthenia, but it's like a sort of reasonably good location, and a lot of mining there, a lot of mining towns and things. Salt mines, I'm imagining, more so than things like iron. Sort of luxury resources, silver maybe, that sort of made the king rich. And Altberg is like there's giant. The whole idea I had for here is there's like loads of giant wildlife. So in D&D books, in the monster manual, whatever, you've got the latter half where there's all the different creatures, and it's like bat, and then giant bat, and badger, giant badger. So basically, I'm saying all of the giant whatever are in here. And people explain that being like, oh yes, that's because the giants used to live here. There's no proof that the giants did actually live here, apart from maybe like some big stone carvings or whatever. But people are like, that could have been done by a human. But of course, we know the giants are real, or are they? Oh, with all of this, you don't know. It's mysterious. It could be real, it could be not. Whoa. So there's the idea that giants were from Altberg. Whether that's the reality is sort of something that remains to be seen. But I think that's kind of what I wanted from that. The reason I'm a bit unsure about giants is obviously Dungeons and Dragons makes the giants very high fantasy in that there's like ice giant and fire giant and cloud giant, and like they've all got like an element attached to them. Which, I don't know, feels a bit too... How do I put it? A bit too, like, 80s? A bit too 90s fantasy, actually. Like these are the fire giants, they are the fire blah. I know that Norse mythology had, like, ice giants and fire giants, but even still, the Jotun weren't actually necessarily giants. The Ents were giants. People don't know that. Jotun were just, like, a kind of, like, mythical being. They were never described as being like 10 feet tall or whatever. They were just sort of dudes. But your problem with giants is they're too big. Yeah, I think giants, stick to dwarves. Can't go wrong with dwarves. They get the job done. Giants, they just squish buildings. They don't build bridges. They break them. The bastards. But yeah, no. So with the giants, I'm like, I want to use giants, but it's like, do I only want to use hill giants? Do I only want to use stone giants? Do I want to just get rid of those categorizations altogether and just have them be giants? But then I'd kind of have to muck with the stat block. But my problem is, like, I don't want them to be like explicitly elementally bound. I kind of just want them to be like huge, long-living people, with castles and shit. And also, I originally thought about maybe having them have castles in the sky and clouds, but then I thought that was just like a touch too fantastical in terms of the fairy tales, because that wasn't very like. I know obviously it was dramatic, but it wasn't very like dark and gritty, which is more the vibe I'm trying to go for. You know what I mean? If you're gonna have one type of giant, they could be separate tribes, clans. Yeah, to be fair, and they could all be in different environments and worship different gods or something, or like that could explain the differentiation. Yeah, that's actually not a bad idea. I think that's probably a better idea than them being like inherently tied to an element. But yeah, do you also, just a question for people, do people think that the, castle in the clouds is like too much? Is that like too high fantasy for the vibe here? Did I err too much on the side of caution with that one, or should I just sort of cut that out because it's a bit too fantastical? I'd be interested in people's takes. Dent. I'm sorry, I'm just doing the tour of the place now. Sorry, were trolls mentioned? Did I think. So the Scandi trolls. Well, the trolls I've actually got as being part of the Hag's army. So they're basically, I imagine trolls in this world as just being like a really big variation of goblins. And so I really wanted trolls to be just these big, mean, ugly versions of the Hag's, sort of army. The giants, I want to be sort of a neutral kind of party that are just kind of like isolationist and mostly just want to keep the fuck to themselves and have done for thousands of years successfully, because they saw what the humans did to the Fae and they didn't want anything to do with that. They're like, fuck it, we'll just stay in our mountains, just leave us the fuck alone. Stumpy hands. I think you could get away with adding it. It's a high fantasy concept, but it can match the tone of your world with some texture, etc. Yeah, to be fair, maybe the to give it a bit more edge, the castles only appear in like torrential thunderstorms because the weight of the castles like bears down on the clouds, and so the clouds are just sort of kind of condensed, so it's just constantly raining. I don't know. Is that too scientific an explanation then? But it could also, it means that instead of it just being a bright sunny day with blue sky and clouds coming along occasionally, it would be just torrential fucking rain as they're going up a beanstalk, which could also make it a skill challenge, which might be good, might be compelling. Okay, so Dent. Dent is actually, that's more the ghosty region I was going for. So famously, there was a major battle here with the elves who lived to the south many years ago, and so there are these. This was actually something thought up by my partner, and they did an absolutely fantastic job with this. It was very, very cool. But essentially, there was a massacre battle, and these fields now, it's the most sort of fertile part of the kingdom. It's the most fertile part of the kingdom. Maybe you get your trolls who have giant boggling mounts to get around. I actually kind of like that. I unironically kind of like that. It's these ravenous, giant squigs, basically, but with arms. Standing on their arms, so on their hands, on their palms. That would be kind of gross and weird, and quite funny. It's just whether I could make that creepy enough. If I could, because it's very easy to do the Scandi trolls quite creepy. But yeah, so Dent, basically it's this land of wine and plenty, German sweet wine, a beautiful picturesque lake at the centre of it, and there's these lovely wildflowers and fields where anything will grow, and at night there's just ghost armies marching and going to war each and every night, and the land is just cursed. So I thought that would be interesting. I thought that'd be a good take on it. But it's trying to make that not clash with the Nebelwald. You know what I mean? But there's a lot of I think of near me. There's a really interesting near me, not near me here, near me back in the UK. There is an interesting story about the Roman roads and how there will be the ghosts of Romans, but they'll be sunk into the ground because the of course, like the ground was like lower then, and there's been layers of sediment and earth that have been built up in the sort of 2,000 years since they were there. And I like this idea, so I'm just going to sort of rip that, chuck it in here, so that there's these ghosts marching around, having wars like at waist height, just like Rawr! And they're cursed to just forever repeat this battle. But beyond that, Dent needs some fleshing out. I need something else that's going on in Dent. You know what I mean? I need another vibe, another vibe, another sort of little tidbits and interesting things. Something I'm keen on. It's one of the places that's less developed, and another one is Alfrand. Alfrand is a place. Alfrand is the least developed by far. I know it used to be Elven territory. It has the highest Elven population. There's a Cultbad, which is like a sauna town, but for elves to like put themselves in ice baths so they live a long time. So it's like the opposite of a sauna town. But yeah, it's and then also Wolfsbrook is the sort of city capital, and the idea here is that it was built upon like an ancient burial mound, like this massive burial mound, like atop a hill, but they didn't know that. They just thought they built a fort on top of a hill, and it was a bit further in. But when the apocalypse happened, oh no, now it's full of zombies, and they just fucking burst out of the ground and suddenly take over the city and ruin everything. So it's crawling with the undead, is the idea. But that's about it. I haven't really got anything unique for the region. And whilst lots of the other regions have more of a culture, I really could do with some help in making Alfrand feel unique, because I'm not sure what makes Alfrand distinctive. It was the last place I filled on the map, and it's the one that's like the least developed. I suppose the least developed. But anyway, so that's a place. Grüneswasser is the last conquered of the regions, and essentially what I'm going with for this is it's this just giant swampland, like almost ruinous, and there was like the Yuan-Ti, who I'm going to go with a more of like a swampy vibe as opposed to an Aztec-y vibe, who have been pushed to this one island off the border of the swamp, but the rest of it is just like really hard to get into, really hard to explore. And there's one of the last remaining cities, the last remaining human city, is like this giant fortress they built at the middle of the swamp, like literally like a tower, and then atop it there's like a flat plain where they built like a settlement, a sort of small city, and it's sort of like they have archers firing down at the hags' armies, which are constantly swarming around it, and it's like very, very isolated, and very hard to get to, but that sort of worked out in their favour because it was the most recent settlement. It was basically the king's attempt to try and settle the swamp. Also, there's Sandhafen, which I feel I should point out is the capital of Kentrum that they'll be going on to fairly early on. And essentially, Sandhafen was built on like the cliffs bordering the ocean, and the Hag's armies just exploded the fucking cliffs, and just like the whole city is now just slowly sinking into the ocean bit by bit. So it's all at an angle, and the further in you get, the more like waterlogged it gets. There's potential for mechanics there, and also there's this idea of like if you explore too far, you're having to swim, which I think could be compelling. Uraltsburg was the old capital of the Uralt before, like in a war with the dwarves to the north. With the orcs to the north, because orcs kind of live in the border mountains. They just salted the fucking earth so nothing could grow there. So they just moved up the road to Neunau, and that was the new sort of regional capital. Before it was then abandoned again when the hags came along. And then there's Mashtig Isle, which is essentially like a community of like inbred like fish people in a very Lovecraftian kind of way is the vibe there. Oh, what am I accidentally doing? That wasn't what I meant to do. Image. There we go. You're going to dip. Thank you very much for visiting Stumpy Ants, and thank you for the raid. I hope you enjoyed what you came here for. And yeah, we'll just continue, and it should be good fun. But yeah, I keep on accidentally clicking the wrong thing. Yeah, all the best. So yeah, essentially, and I forgot about Tolstenia. So Tolstenia is the center of the kingdom. You had the Roosevelt, which was this central massive forest filled with flowers, known for its flowers, its primary export. Like how tulips sort of led to Holland being like a global superpower because they were so valued. In the same way roses are, because roses come from here. One thing I need to add to this map is on one of our new characters. I've been speaking with Henry. The Order of the Rose, which is like the Knight's Guard for the king, had a temple somewhere in here. But now it's called, so you got Roseburg, which was the capital. Now it's called Dornburg, which just means thorn. So you went from Rose City to like the Thorn City because it's overgrown, covered in like nature that like is wild and twisted and will attack you with like lashing vines and things. And then there's the three hags who live there and who are positioned there. And they live in the old ruins of the palace. And then there's a few other places like Siebeck, which was a spa town, and various other things. Scharlach Obskarten is a halfling settlement where they brew magical cider, and there's some interesting stuff there. I actually don't want to ruin too much about there, but that's another one of those places that's like holding out. But yeah, so that's a full rundown of the general gist of the world. Basically, magic is new and mystical. The various regions sort of all have their own unique cultures and function fairly independently. And it's in the process of being developed. I know that was quite a long preamble, but I really want to sort of help develop this, and hopefully in future I'm going to come back and do further streams with a bit more of like a structure in terms of things I want your help with, working through each village or place and talking through it with people to try and elaborate on it and basically build as much of a developed world as possible. But honestly, I've been going for about an hour and a half, and that's about what I wanted to go for. Really, I'm pretty glad that people have stuck around and come and hung out with me. But this is the beginning of this. This proved to be quite successful, and I really appreciate your engagement. So I'm going to try and make this a weekly thing, I hope, and really just kind of have little short sessions where I'll come in, chat with you guys, and do a bit of world building, get your opinions on things, and develop things to a level where I'm happy with them. And you know what? Sod it. I think I'm going to play my little intro for those of you that have stuck around this long. Because I'm not sure if Naomi's still here. She probably still is. But I'm just going to ignore the chat and hope she doesn't notice. But essentially, I want to play for you the intro for the podcast we've got so far, which includes a bit of lore about the world that you've already heard, but also should give you a sort of idea of the vibe I'm going for and introduce one of the main characters. So I'll just get that up. Okay, I've got it. Are you guys ready? I'm going to pause myself now and I'm going to play the audio. So let me just put my desktop audio all the way up. And here we go. Here's a little teaser.
Once upon a time, there was a king who ruled over his kingdom with jubilance and fealty to his people. He was a just king, beloved by all. He ruled through the longest peacetime ever seen, with the fields full of plenty and the homes full of wine and song. But dark forces were creeping through the shadows as evil conjurers saw this golden age with baleful eyes. Their machinations with strange, long-forgotten entities were kept secret, bubbling under the surface of the land like a disease beneath its skin. Soon their plans bore fruit, as the worms that walk made its way through the peaceful kingdoms to the north and south, strange larvae crawling through the corpses and bringing the stench of undeath across the world. Along with that horrific curse, a great winter spread across the world, one that covered cities and mountains in ice and snow. Oceans froze, and people too, leaving nothing but the dead to roam what remained. The king's army tried to fight them off as they reached his kingdom, led by the Order of the Rose, pushing back against the encroaching winter and hordes of squirming undead. But after months of fighting, there were few men left. There was little hope, and the leaves were falling off the trees. The king sought the counsel of a coven of hags, begging them to save his land and spare his people. The hags agreed in return for three things: his kingdom, his life, and his firstborn. With a heavy heart, the king accepted the terms, handing over his crown and his daughter to the crones. Soon after, the people screamed in horror as they saw his body hanging from the battlements of his castle. The hags kept their promise, with the eldest among them pushing back the winter and making it so the worms could not pass into the kingdom. Instead, the lands were stuck at the end of autumn, just on the precipice of winter. But now the hags control the land and its people, and they look upon both with avarice. They transformed the forests around the palace into a twisted nightmare. They sent armies of monsters to raze every city to the ground. Years passed, and the nights grew harsher. Hope seemed lost, but as
The knocking breaks the sound of rain beating against the ground outside like bruised fruit falling from the tree, thrumming against the window like it's impatient to be let in. The old skald, Ansgar, closes the heavy leather cover of the tome and clasps it in his bony fingers as if it were about to be forced from his hands. His sunken eyes look out from skin as wrinkled as abused vellum. He turns to examine the children in front of him before glancing upwards towards the door, his face cast in shadow by the light of the fireplace.
Christoph, get the children in the back room. I'll check the door.
The old man sits up from the rocking chair, and his hunched figure heads towards the entrance as thunder cracks and the room is illuminated by the blue glow of lightning for but a moment. He turns the handle and tentatively creaks open the door. So, there we go. I do hope you guys enjoyed that. That's a bit of a sneak preview. I'm quite proud of that. And, oh, this is very loud. That's essentially an understanding of kind of what I'm going for with this, and a bit of a spoiler for those that are interested. But yeah, I'm very excited about this series. We've got a wonderful new cast member coming on with a fantastic voice, who's also bloody hilarious. And we've got Naomi and Henry returning. Also, we're fine with Annie. She basically just got very busy and had to move back to York. And like sometimes adults, especially on what is a passion project, get too busy to do things. So yeah, don't worry. There's no bad blood between all of us. And we're still good friends. We still talk to her. But yeah, she just couldn't do it anymore. But either way, we've got an amazing new cast member, who I'm not going to spoil who it is. But then we've also got some great stuff in the works, some great characters, and I'm going to try and make this a regular thing to come with you guys and to basically ask for your help building up this world. So for all those that are interested in this and have stuck with this, I really appreciate it. Your time and having given you a rundown of the world. I'll let you know that next week I think we're going to try and flesh out Alfrand, because it really needs it. It's the least developed part of all of these places, and I would love your help with it. So if you want to come and return, please do next time, and we will get an amazing sort of developed version of Alfrand going, I'm sure. Okay, but for now, I've just got to thank you very much for coming to this, the first time I've ever streamed and we've ever streamed here, and it's been far more successful than I'd hoped. I thought we'd get 1 or 2 people, but we got upwards of like 15, 16 people at one point, which is really comforting, especially as like we haven't advertised this platform at all. I posted on the Twitter and that's about it. But yeah, I'm going to make this a regular weekly thing on Thursdays to just come and write a bit of lore. So if you want to return for that, please follow us here, follow us on Twitter, and you'll be able to find out when and where that happens. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.